keep that stuff in mind. I think the parable that we read, the parable of the mustard seed, and I put a little chunk of text that came right before. It's almost like another parable, but I think it informs this one. It challenges our views, I think, of the nature of progress and change, about the movement of growth and development. Primarily, what I want to name and to look at is the process and the pattern in general. So what I want to do is sort of explore that process, and then we're going to return to those two sort of examples that I named in the beginning, what we might call sort of spiritual or personal growth, and then maybe social growth or cultural change. And so the pattern is really obvious. It can be roughly outlined like this. There's a seed, and you plant it, and it grows. That's essentially sort of the movement of the parable. And we go, yeah, duh, that's pretty obvious. And we've been saying these parables can sort of rock along with these tame readings because we hold them at arm's length. We read it and we go, oh, that's a story about, right? And we're sort of still holding it out here. But when we inhabit the story, when we subject ourselves to the agency of the story, as if we're actually in it and moving with it, we engage the process, it becomes uncomfortable because this is actually what it says, or this is what I would say the parable feels like. The process is no control, limited control, no control. And I want to take a few minutes and unpack what I mean here. So you, or within you, we might say, is a seed. You didn't buy it, you didn't earn it, you didn't pray a prayer to receive it, you didn't buy into a religion in order to get it. It is in you, or we should say probably it is you. It is a given. Its existence, its life itself. It's called by many different names: a divine life force, God, the sacred spark, the kingdom of God within you, Jesus would say, or living water. The essence of our sacred humanity. It is unique. There is only one you. The only manifestation of you there has ever been or will ever be. And in that, there is something originally good. There's sort of an affirmation of existence just in existence itself. And so you call this soul or essence or whatever. And by the way, the fact that you exist, the fact that I exist, and don't just nod along like us being here is totally reasonable, because we have no control in our own existence. I mean, this is ridiculous, right? Like, I grew up hearing stories about my dad living in a chicken coop while selling insurance out of college. He was once tripping on acid and drove by Woodstock, like missed the turn, didn't realize what was going on, and he missed it. He used to live in the woods, like in the wilderness in Alaska, told us stories about encountering wolves and things like that. He accidentally graduated from college years after finishing coursework on a technicality. They sent him his diploma in the mail. Alfred University. He hitchhiked to Europe on a shrimp boat to chase a girl that was not my mom. And meanwhile, while all this is going on, my very put-together mom has gotten married to a very successful doctor. She's the head of a psych ward. She's a nurse, right? And so, the absolute accident of my existence, growing up hearing those stories, how did I end up here? How did I end up a person? And then I hear stories about the horrific abuse that my grandmother suffered at the hands of the church, and then just the general indifference to religion in my house growing up. My ending up here tonight giving a sermon to you guys, having started a congregation, this is stupid. It's this is bonkers that we're here. The fact that we are, that we exist, at the base level is just some kind of sacred given. It's like the nod of the universe to our very being. The seed is given just because it is, and we have no control. We get life. That's sort of that's where our awareness starts. We're here. And I'm not saying, when I say it's originally good, I'm not saying life isn't hard, right? I'm not saying it's not cruel and violent and horrifically complex and scary in ways that we can't possibly make sense of, right? In ways that no longer permit us to just say, well, everything happens for a reason. I mean, that's bullshit. It doesn't. We've sort of called that. Life is really hard. Life is hard. We're not dismissing that. There is no argument. What I'm saying is it is a gift to be alive. It's a gift to be alive, period. To be breathing, to have a friend, to have an intimate relationship, to share a meal with someone, to have a decent night's sleep, to feel the sun. It's just a gift to be. Life is a gift. And part of the givenness of the seed, of this thing that we receive, is that by being alive, yes, you are open to the experience of the full trauma of all of the hard times and the horror. But none of those things can rob us of that singular truth that life is a gift. Life is a gift. That's the seed, sort of the starting point. I want to offer 2 points of clarity about this. Number one, the seed that is in you, life, existence, human dignity, is also in every other person on the planet. And this conviction about how reality is, this matters now more than ever. Because isn't this where racism and prejudice and bigotry come from? A subtle or insidious belief that that group doesn't have it. Or that they have it, but it's less. Like the life, the goodness, the fullness of existence, that group, that person, that category, that color, that gender, that religion. Like I have it, obviously, but them? I don't know, or maybe not so much. What we're saying is life, just showing up, just the goodness of being, is like a universal yes. It is an affirmation by presence. You're here. Of the goodness and the uniqueness of every human being. And secondly, the image is from the seed to some kind of tree or a big bush. So part of what I would say that the original goodness is made up of, part of what makes life dynamic instead of static, is that the seed packs enormous potential. Enormous potential for the fullest possible life, for growth and flourishing and beauty. So the life of God within you and manifest in the world is like someone who plants a seed. The reality that's imagined in the name of God bursts into being when we do something. When we do something with our potential. When we do something with the life that's given to us. And I think we sort of have a visceral reaction because we know so well the alternative. And you could probably picture this person in your mind, or you may have even felt yourself this way. They had so much potential. I had so much potential. And so we go from zero control, right? The zero control of existence. You're here. It's shocking to all of us. Yeah, we get it. We're here. We're alive. But potential, the potential of the seed sort of presents us with at least what feels like some control. Maybe we do have some agency. Maybe we can influence the way we respond to people and live with people and live from love and not fear. Absolutely. So we plant it. We take the seed that we're given and we plant it. We make decisions about where we invest our life. We have some desire, we have some intention about where we plant the life that we have been given. And we're going to come back and riff on that in a minute, about the soil, where it is that we choose to plant our lives. But I want to first be very clear about the nature of the control that we have during this planting sort of step. It is limited. Right? At best, the control you have to plant the potential of your life, the goodness of the life you've been given, you do have control. Hear me say that. There is agency. There are things you can do. There are ways you can become the person you want to be. But at best, if you do everything right, your control is still limited. And I was trying to think about how to communicate this, and these were the two best examples I could think of. I don't know what that says about me. I think the control is a bit like whitewater rafting, right? Sure, you get to decide to get in the boat, and they hand you a paddle to make you think you're steering. But at some level, you are at the mercy of the river, right? And so, yeah, you're sort of in control, but at the end of the day, you're going where the river is going. You're going where the river takes you. This is a kind of control, but it's a limited control. I also think maybe this is like skydiving. You are fully in charge. You're the boss. You make the decision to jump out of a plane. Absolutely. But the second you do, yeah, I hear you can do some cool tricks. And I think if you do like that thing, you can maybe control like some of the direction of how far from where you want to land you land. And you decide where you pull the chute. But at the end of the day, you're going down. You're falling. So you have control, yes, but it's limited. I'm saying that what this agency that we have is also, it's a control that we definitely have, but it's also swept along. right? It's a piece of something bigger over which we don't have total control. Does that make sense? There's probably better metaphors, but so it's a decision we make to commit without a guaranteed outcome, which is hard. We like outcomes. So where you plant your life, the seed of your potential, is a massive act of faith, because as soon as you do, the control is in many ways surrendered. Or at least for healthier, non-neurotic people like me, the hope is that it's surrendered. Of course, this is why so many of us, I think for real, like the booming therapy industry, I think the reason so many of us are struggling, right, mental health-wise, I think we have this mismatch between our desire, which is so often at odds with the amount of control we actually have. And somewhere along the line, it was communicated to us that we should have all that control. And so we go through life thinking we should have control over all this stuff, and we don't. And yeah, that's taxing. That's difficult psychologically. And trying harder doesn't work. Right? If you don't have control over something, feeling really strongly like you should doesn't make it any better. In many ways, once we plant the seed of our potential in some soil, in a certain soil, there's a ton about our growth and development, about social change, about progress that is out of our control. So we move from no control to limited control, and we're back at no control again. We're back at this sort of mysterious word that I think very often spiritual and religious people throw around, growth, right? But it's really vague. The seed grows, but we don't really know how, right? Like you think about a seed growing in the ground, is there like, I don't know, maybe botanists do this, or like down in the soil, like micromanaging the seed, like come on, do it. No, I think at some level, like it does what it's going to do. You put it in the soil and it grows. We don't know how. And that's why I included that little section of the reading before the parable of the seed. Because it says, this guy who scatters seed day and night, whether he sleeps, whether he wakes up, the seed grows. And I love that it sort of paints that picture before this parable, that the growth is not connected to our agency, that at a deep level, it's mysterious. We get to plant the seed, and then after that, it's really kind of out of our hands. And so I think we flourish or we fizzle in the soil of practices and habits and rhythms and patterns, but again, we do so indirectly. And I think we only do this growth thing over a long period of time, right? The seed blossoms where we plant it. Beyond that, we can't make it grow. We can't force it. We can't rush it. In this sense, growth, progress, change, transformation is mysteriously organic, right? This isn't an economic transaction where we give this and then we get it back, right? Or we do this and then the result is that we get that back. It's much more organic, right? It's like an organic investment. We plant ourselves, our life force, our potential, and our intentions in some soil, whatever that is, various soils, and we actually just then kind of see what happens. Often mostly unconscious of the change that is happening. So, if we come back to these two opening conversations, I just want to sort of lay this pattern, right? No control, limited control, no control. Just lay that over what can really be frustrating or confusing in terms of the way that we engage and understand growth and progress. So my colleague, I'm sitting there, he's flabbergasted about how I've changed, or that I've changed, that my convictions and my theology and engagement with the world, that it's open, that it's shifted, that it's different than his. And as an aside, and this gets back to this thing, people talk about spiritual growth, and so often I think what is meant, and this is the way I understood spiritual growth when I first came to faith, spiritual growth, for many, many people, means the relentless pursuit of information and experience that bolster what they've already chosen to believe. And so they grow to interpret all experience through the lens of confirming their views, rather than calling them into question. In my mind, though, that doesn't sound and that doesn't feel like growth. feels like stasis. It feels like sameness. It feels like sort of calcifying in a particular view, not growing or changing or thriving. So that being said, I think, though, that we do, one of the major drivers for making decisions, often due to religious experience or some conviction or some sense of quest or seeking or sacred curiosity, discovery, I think for whatever reason, we have experiences like that and we decide to plant ourselves in some kind of what I'll call spiritual soil or some sort of soil of self-development, growth. And I think this can be a lot of things. And it can be named in a lot of ways, but I think ultimately what we're talking about is God, what we name in the name of God. And I think this is an incredibly important distinction. I don't think the soil is what we think about God. I don't think it's our ideas. I think spiritual soil is our experience of God, or I would say the things that we experience in the name of God. So, for example, rather than sort of the laundry list, right? Like I believe that God is a super being who lives on Zoltan and remote monitors the earth, intervening from time to time to rig football games, and Jesus was the golden ticket to space Narnia. Like not objective beliefs in a list, but instead of beliefs, what I mean is this. I mean when we experience gratitude, when we experience mercy, when we are forgiven, right? These things that we experience in the name of God, the things that are going on in the name of God. Compassion, mercy, hope. Unconditional acts of kindness. To be a part of a supportive community who loves you as you are unconditionally, but whose communal ambitions and values call you past yourself. They call you from where you currently are. They stimulate growth, we might say. As a community experiences things like mercy and justice and hope together, it calls everyone forward, including you. And I think this form of life is the soil. I think it's a soil that is harbored in the name of God. I think this is what we mean. For me, this is what I mean when I mean God. So I think when you practice justice, when you practice mercy, acts of kindness, when you sit in silence, and you experience the oneness of all things, or when you experience that sort of sacred emptiness that actually increases your capacity to love, I think you're planting the seed of your potential. I think you're planting your life in what I would call some spiritual soil, in God, so to speak. Not when you have religious ideas and you think them, right? Or you have beliefs and you believe them. But rather, when these capacities are increasing in you, gratitude, kindness, justice, mercy, then I think you're growing spiritually. But the flip side is true too, and this is the scary part. Regardless of what you think or believe, or what you think you believe, they can be good things, right? God is good. Jesus loves me. I have the Spirit of God within me. You can believe all those things and you can think them. But if you plant yourself in patterns of shame and in cycles of guilt and in postures of fear and in communities that devalue and dehumanize, in these cycles of hopeless images of the world and of other people, then it doesn't matter really what you think you believe. Your seed will shrivel or it will grow into something horrific. So I had this conversation with my colleague, and what I realized is this. I have planted the seed of my life, personally and vocationally, right? This is who I am, and this is also sort of what I do. I've planted it here with you all in this community. And then tangentially with like other communities like Pete Rollins and the company he keeps. The soil that I've planted myself in has stimulated and nurtured some significant growth and change. I've planted myself in a community with the most diversity I've ever known. And this is something about the small world I come from. The different things that are meant by the people in this room that call themselves Christians is staggering. So a community with Christians of all different types and who mean totally different things when they say that. a community with Buddhists and atheists and Quakers and agnostics and Hindus and Baha'is and secular humanists and artists and musicians, mystics and meditators and entrepreneurs, developers, educators, managers. The categories, the ideas, the beliefs, the experiences and convictions that I brought in when I planted my seed here had to expand in some, I would say, dramatic ways to make room for me to be loved by you all well and for me to learn to love well. Just for me to sort of discover and communicate a message and a form of life every week that could be faithfully Christian and generous enough to incorporate each and every seed and every voice and every life in this congregation, but also a sense of incorporating the people in the broader community. I've grown. I've changed. My heart is bigger. I think my theology is probably much more generous and a lot less certain. I think my convictions are stronger than ever, but also broader than ever. And these weren't decisions that I made on a daily or weekly basis, right? Like I come into the office on Monday morning. Well, I guess this is the week that I will expand my embrace of other religions, and this week I'm going to address my theology of incorporating queer voices into the liturgy, and then next month seems like a good time to stop believing that God punishes people for eternity, but I will wait till the first of the month because that's when I'm scheduled to stop believing that. That's not how it works, right? That isn't how it works. I planted myself in what I believe has been the richest and most beautiful soil of my life, and over a period of years, it's hard to believe we're coming up on 4 years, this is who I've become. And in many ways, this is really like for a handful of people in the room, this is like 8 or 9 years. This is who I've become. This is who I am becoming. This is sort of what my growth has looked like. And so, yeah, I think we make decisions about planting ourselves in communities that engage in disciplines and practices which relentlessly name and rehearse and point towards a form of life. And then I think beyond that, we sort of grow towards that together. And by the way, disciplines themselves are a sort of mysterious soil, right? They aren't spirituality on demand the way that we would love to think they are. Like I picked up a book, Mediocre to Mystic, in 6 weeks, and so very soon I will be self-actualized. Find me in week 5, right? Or like yoga for dummies. Like you come upon someone who's twisted into a pretzel. It's like sweating. It's like, I can do a pretzel. Right, but are you peaceful? Do you feel embodied? Well, hell no, I'm in pain. Like I'm in a lot of pain. My body can't do this, and so I'm sort of like rushing it, right? Or like, I can sit in silence for 20 minutes. Excellent, tell me about it. Can you get out, so to speak, or can you get deeper? Can you be still? Have you experienced emptiness? Well, no, it's awful, right? But I can force myself to do it, right? Well, why not start with like 3 or 4 minutes? Because I can do it, right? Growth takes time. We don't force it. We can't force it. We plant ourselves in some rhythms and practices and in a community of people, and we hope. We hope. We might also use the word, we exercise some faith that we will see growth over time. So this is true for spirituality. We have this potential that's given. We have a little bit of control over the soil of community, practices, experiences that we plant ourselves in, but then we sort of see what grows. We watch what happens. I think this is also true in, again, some very uncomfortable ways based on what's going on in the world. I think this is true of what I will call social soil. I think social soil forms us, it grows us, it does change us individually, but I also think that we plant our movements of hope, our ideas about justice. I think we plant our dreams for the future. We plant those seeds in social soil as well. And in the same way, we hope they grow into things like racial equality and civil rights and systemic change and some social healing. And those seeds always come back to that core truth, that core conviction about reality that life is a gift and it is given to everyone. That's where it has to start. And ultimately, here's what I mean, or here's why I think this even matters. Because this stuff happens, right? And now we're in a world where we can't look away. We've got Pulse in Orlando. We've got this seemingly unending string of terror attacks that sort of, they've been going on all along, but maybe we're more aware as a result of having one in Orlando. We've got all of the tension between racial systemic inequality that we can't ignore, tension with law enforcement, an absolutely broken and scary political system, not just in the US, but in other countries around the world. And we grieve, and we mourn, and we're in shock, and we're overwhelmed. We don't know how to respond, but eventually we get to the point where we go, what can I do? How do I change things? Who do I have to talk to? Where do I show up to march? Where do I show up to protest? Where does the money get sent? And even if we do all that, and we feel good about doing that to help make change, we still feel like it's too small, and it's not enough, and I'm really not seeing any progress, right? I'm doing all the things, but I don't see change now. And if I'm honest, I'm really not that hopeful about what my effect is having in the world. And I think part of the reason this is so frustrating is the same reason we so often choose to read this parable at arm's length. We like to read it as a story that's about something, rather than surrendering, risking, entering into the story and experiencing what the process actually might feel like. The sort of troubling reality that this is actually how substantial and lasting change happens. This is how progress is made. No control, limited control, no control. At best, our agency to change things on a grand scale, which I think is the same as it is in our lives, is limited to where we plant our ambition and our potential and the hopes and dreams of the movements that we want to be a part of. We can and we must get active. We've got to keep hosting dialogues. We have to get educated. We have to protest injustice and vote and lobby and demand change and write letters and make phone calls. We can and we must plant ourselves in movements like that, in that good soil of working for humanity and justice and equality. We can have conversations and hopefully sermons and prayers and articles and books and documentaries and guest speakers and conversation groups that are good soil, that are good nurturing places of practice, that provide nutritious soil for social change. But at the end of the day, can we force it? No. Right? If we do all those things and we do all of them well, and even if we can figure out how to replicate more groups of people and more communities who are doing those things and doing them well, can all of the good intention and the nutritious practices and the honorable ideologies of this social soil end racism right now? They can't. Can our dialogues and our sermons and our solidarity with others end homophobia this week? Probably not. Can getting educated and increasing understanding and our willingness to sit with people who have polar opposite perspectives to us, different ideologies and convictions, can our generous engagement with the task of untangling these complex issues, can they end terrorism tonight? No. And that's terrifying. But it's also how reality works. This is how change happens. These are good things. They're good soil, they're nutritious, they're necessary soil, but there isn't a magic wand. There's not a quick fix. Because growth and change and progress are mysterious. There is more out of our control than there is in our control. We can do our absolute best to plant our lives in the most nutritious soil. We can invite our family and friends to join us in it. We can plant our movements and our hopes and our dreams in good soil. And then we observe and we nurture this long and cumulative effect that we call change, that we call growth or progress, the slow work of transformation that I think is what is going on in the name of God, right? That force that is pulling everything forward. We let that do its work in us, in our communities, in our world. It takes an earnest commitment to plant our lives and our potential with every ounce of energy we have. And then to trust and to hope that love grows. And to what end? Right? What's the hope? Where does this go? If the seed is our life and our potential, and the soil is where we plant ourselves and rhythms and practices and community, the tree is, again, sort of a simple image. Something that started small and singular now experiences life beyond its own wants and needs. Something small and singular experiences life beyond its own wants and needs. It serves some kind of greater purpose. In the story, the branches are for perching, and there's shade, and there's shelter, and there's hospitality. And it's the same thing. How did this happen? Just from this little seed. Growth. Great. What the hell does that mean? Exactly. Yeah, it grew. It changed over time. It was in the ground. We couldn't see it. It took shape. How did that happen? Well, there was a seed, and it was in some soil, and then it became. It's terribly unhelpful because it's outside of what we want to control. But then one day you realize, the hope is, then one day you realize I have branches, right? I didn't realize that they were growing, but now I have branches. I'm a person who provides shelter for other people. There is some sense that my house or my cubicle at the office, that my presence has become sanctuary for people. That what we're doing together is actually changing things. This little discussion group has blossomed into something more. This tiny meditation group is expanding its capacity to love. This little community group is now reaching beyond itself. Your life then is not about you. It is about something bigger and more, and it's lived in service to a grander reality. Isn't that sort of the definition of growth or maturity? Or if we were going to talk about a person, this would be like an elder, right? Or the wise person. Someone who is, or even like a sustainable and established movement, that it's marked by a larger vision than consumption and personal gratification and survival. That it sort of flourishes beyond that. Life becomes bigger than our own wants and needs. And back to the frustrating part, you can't force yourself to get there. You can't pray a prayer and be instantaneously selfless. You can't get immediately compassionate and loving. You can't immediately sort of inherit a sense of burden for justice, for equality. These things grow up in us. And I think in service to others, their deepest desires are satisfied. And they got there by growing, whatever that means. It's not a book, right? It's not a 3-week class. It's not a sermon. There isn't a shortcut. The invitation is to somehow figure out what it means to put ourselves in good soil. Paths and patterns of least resistance. Which begs a few disruptive questions. If we narrow and limit the scope of our ability to control what we are becoming and what the world is becoming, our personal and our social development, so to speak, this intensifies the pressure and the importance of the very little bit that we can control. If most of what we're doing is really out of control of controlling who we're becoming and what's happening in the world, the lack of agency in the givenness of our life, of the seed, in the lack of agency in the growth itself, means we become increasingly responsible for the planting. If that's the thing where we have some control, then that's everything. if that's where we have the capacity for even a little bit of change, then that's where we have to put our intention and focus. So where are you planting your life? Where are you planting your life? In what are you planting the potential and ambition and goodness of this life that you have? This is the one you get. Where are you planting it? Where does it go? What are the habits? What are the rhythms? What are you practicing? This one was uncomfortable for me. What in your life is at this point muscle memory? It has become so normal. Here's the part that stings. What does that say about who you are becoming? What does that say about the kind of person you're growing into? About the kind of progress or the future that we might expect from you? Faith, in this sense, is trusting that there will be some fruit from nearly invisible beginnings. Something significant from something seemingly insignificant. So spiritual growth, then, is not ultimately about arriving at the pinnacle of individual, personal, private belief or enlightenment, but is, in fact, the form that our lives take in relation to the gift of their givenness and in service to others. So whether spiritually or socially, individually or communally, systematically, though we rarely get to see this in real time, the blossoming becomes evident when we realize that the seed, the singular potential, has transcended itself, its own wants and needs. It's become useful. It's become sanctuary. It's become hospitality for other people, for the world. Growth into people and into movements of this kind of hospitality is what we rehearse every week when we come to this table. We're invited every week. We break bread. We offer the cup. The invitation to remember the scandalous message of inclusion and love that we encounter in Christ. The invitation to remember this focal example of a life lived beyond itself to the point of death. And each week, I think of this as a practice. I hope you all do too. We practice hearing and rehearsing these words. May they plant us over and over in the rich and nutritious soil of a community of love, a school of love, and a life formed by love. Hear these words again tonight. This table has been set for us. It is open to us and to all people, and no one will ever be turned away.